Hello and welcome back to our podcast. I'm Sophie.
And I'm David. Wonderful to have you with us again today.
Now, as always, before we get into today's conversation, we have a few small but very important things to ask of you. First, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second and it makes an enormous difference to how many people discover this podcast.
Second, please subscribe if you haven't already. We put a great deal of care and thought into every single episode, and subscribing means you'll never miss one.
Third, we would absolutely love to hear from you in the comments section. Today's topic is one where everyone has something to say, and we genuinely want to know your thoughts. So please do share them below after you've listened.
And finally, if you know someone who is learning English and would enjoy a natural, relaxed conversation to practice with, please share this episode with them. Send them the link, tell them about Pause Café. It would mean the world to us.
Right, today's topic. David, I'm going to jump straight in with a question, and I want you to be honest.
Oh dear, that's never a good start.
How do you feel about money? Not how much you have or don't have, but emotionally. What feelings does the word money bring up for you?
Honestly, anxiety, almost immediately. And I think that's quite telling because I'm not in a desperate financial situation. I'm not struggling to pay my bills. But the moment money comes up as a topic, even just the word, there's this low-level hum of worry.
Which is incredibly common. Studies consistently show that money is one of the leading sources of stress for people across all income levels. It doesn't matter whether you're earning $20,000 or $200,000 a year. The anxiety is remarkably persistent.
Which suggests the anxiety isn't really about the money itself, is it? It's about something deeper.
Exactly. And that's really what today's episode is about. Not budgeting tips or investment advice. We're not financial advisors and we won't pretend to be. But the psychology behind our relationship with money. Why we feel the way we do about it. Where those feelings come from. And whether we can develop a healthier attitude towards it.
Which I think is genuinely useful for everyone, regardless of your financial situation.
Completely. So, let's start at the beginning. Where do our feelings about money come from?
For most people, I think it starts in childhood. The financial environment you grow up in shapes your relationship with money in ways that are incredibly difficult to unpick later on.
Absolutely. If you grew up in a household where money was scarce, where you heard your parents argue about bills, where treats were rare and financial stress was a constant background noise, that leaves a mark.
And it leaves a mark in different ways for different people. Some people who grew up with very little money become extremely cautious as adults. They save obsessively. They find it very difficult to spend even when they can afford to, because some deep part of them is still braced for the worst.
And others go the opposite way. They overspend, almost compulsively, because spending feels like an act of defiance against the scarcity they grew up with. Like proving to themselves that things are different now.
And others go the opposite way. They overspend, almost compulsively, because spending feels like an act of defiance against the scarcity they grew up with. Like proving to themselves that things are different now.
There's actually a term for the broader concept, money scripts. It's used in financial therapy, which is genuinely a field, by the way. Money scripts are the unconscious beliefs about money that we develop in childhood, usually picked up from our families, and that continue to drive our financial behavior as adults without us even realizing it.
Money scripts, such as?
Things like, money is the root of all evil, or wealthy people are greedy and untrustworthy, or, on the flip side, money equals security and I can never have enough of it, or it's selfish to want more than you need. These beliefs operate under the surface, influencing how we earn, spend, save, and talk about money.
Or don't talk about it. Because money is one of those topics that remains genuinely taboo in British culture, isn't it? You simply don't ask someone how much they earn. It's considered deeply rude.
Extraordinarily rude. More uncomfortable than asking about someone's health, their relationships, their political views. Money is the last great taboo in polite British conversation.
And I find that fascinating and slightly problematic. because the secrecy around salaries, for example, actively benefits employers and actively disadvantages employees. If no one talks about what they earn, you have no way of knowing whether you're being paid fairly.
That's a really sharp point. Pay transparency, the idea that salaries should be openly shared, or at least accessible, is something that's been gaining traction in some countries. In parts of Scandinavia, for instance, tax records are publicly available. Anyone can look up anyone else's income.
Which sounds absolutely horrifying to British ears.
Completely. The very idea. But the argument is that transparency reduces inequality, because it's much harder to underpay someone when everyone can see what everyone else is earning.
It's an interesting trade-off, isn't it? Privacy versus fairness.
Very much so. Okay, I want to talk about something I think a lot of our listeners will relate to, and that's the emotional experience of spending. Because spending money is not a purely rational act, is it?
Not remotely. If it were, we'd all make perfectly logical decisions every time. We'd never impulse buy. We'd never spend to make ourselves feel better. We'd never splash out on something we can't really afford because it feels good in the moment.
But of course, we do all of those things. And the reason is that spending is deeply tied to our emotions. There's actually a well-documented phenomenon called retail therapy. The idea that shopping can temporarily lift your mood.
And there's some truth to it, isn't there? That little hit of excitement when you buy something new.
There is. Buying something triggers a release of dopamine, the pleasure chemical in the brain. So in a very literal sense, shopping can make you feel better. The problem is that it's short-lived. And if you're using spending to manage difficult emotions, stress, sadness, boredom, loneliness, you can end up in a destructive cycle.
Spend to feel better. Feel worse about spending. Spend again to feel better.
Exactly. And the rise of online shopping and one-click purchasing has made this enormously easier to fall into, because the friction has been removed. You don't have to get in a car, drive to a shop, queue up, and hand over physical cash. You just tap a button, and something arrives at your door the next day.
Physical cash is interesting, actually. There's research suggesting that paying with cash is psychologically more painful than paying by card or phone, because you literally watch the money leave your hands. Whereas a contactless payment feels almost abstract, like it didn't really happen.
Which is presumably exactly why businesses love contactless payments.
Precisely. The less real money feels, the more freely we tend to spend it.
Let's talk about the other side of the coin. And I appreciate that idiom is particularly fitting today. Saving. Because our relationship with saving is just as complicated as our relationship with spending.
In what way?
Well, there are people who find saving deeply satisfying. Watching a number go up, building a cushion, feeling secure. And there are others for whom saving feels almost impossible. Not because they don't earn enough necessarily, but because they simply can't make themselves prioritize future security over present enjoyment.
Which economists call the problem of present bias. We are, as a species, pretty poorly wired for long-term thinking. The future always feels abstract and distant, and the present always feels immediate and real. So a treat today consistently beats a comfortable retirement in 30 years.
Even when we know, intellectually, that we should be thinking about the future.
Knowing and doing are very different things.
They really are. And I think this is where the cultural context matters enormously. In the UK, for example, home ownership has historically been seen as the ultimate financial goal. The thing you were supposed to work towards, the sign that you'd made it.
Which has created enormous pressure, particularly for younger generations who are facing a housing market that has become almost incomprehensibly expensive in many parts of the country.
And what happens when the cultural script, work hard, save up, buy a house, becomes genuinely unattainable for a significant portion of the population?
I think what happens is a kind of collective despair that expresses itself in interesting ways. Some people double down and sacrifice everything to get on the property ladder. Others decide the whole system is rigged and adopt what's sometimes called a treat-yourself philosophy, spending freely in the present because saving feels pointless.
Neither of which is entirely healthy, perhaps.
Neither extreme tends to be. And I think what gets lost in both camps is a genuine conversation about what money is actually for.
Which is?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? What is money actually for? At its most basic, it's a means to an end. It's a tool. It allows you to meet your needs, to have experiences, to support the people you care about, and to have a degree of security and freedom.
But it's very easy to lose sight of that and start treating money as an end in itself, where accumulating it becomes the goal, regardless of what it actually enables.
And that way lies a rather joyless existence, I think.
I'd agree. There's actually some really interesting research on the relationship between money and happiness. For a long time, the headline finding was that happiness plateaus at a certain income level. That is, above a certain point, more money doesn't make you significantly happier.
I've heard that. I think the figure used to be quoted as around $75,000 a year in American studies.
Right, though more recent research has complicated that picture somewhat. It seems the relationship between income and well-being is more nuanced than a simple plateau. It continues to improve with income, but with diminishing returns, and it depends enormously on how you spend the money.
How you spend it matters.
Hugely. The research consistently shows that spending money on experiences rather than possessions tends to bring more lasting happiness, and spending on other people, giving, tends to bring more happiness than spending on yourself.
Which is rather a lovely finding, isn't it? The things that actually make us happy with money are the least materialistic uses of it.
It really is. And it connects to a broader point about our culture's tendency to conflate wealth with success, and success with happiness, as if the three are the same thing, when in reality they're quite distinct.
You can be wealthy and deeply unhappy. You can be modestly comfortable and enormously content. You can be financially struggling and find profound meaning and joy.
Money is part of the picture, but it's a much smaller part of the picture than our culture would have us believe.
Right, let's have a proper debate, because I think there's a genuinely interesting tension here.
Go on.
Is it irresponsible to be relaxed about money? Because everything we've said about not obsessing over it, about experiences over possessions, about present enjoyment. There's a version of that which is just a romantic justification for being financially reckless.
That's fair, and I don't want to romanticize financial precariousness. Not having enough money is genuinely stressful, genuinely limiting, and genuinely harmful to people's health and well-being. I'm not suggesting everyone should cheerfully ignore their finances.
But
I think there's a difference between being financially responsible, which I think everyone should aspire to, and being financially anxious in a way that robs you of any present enjoyment. You can track your spending, save sensibly, plan for the future, and still allow yourself to buy a nice meal or go on holiday without feeling crushing guilt.
the middle path, essentially.
Exactly. Neither reckless nor paralyzed. Thoughtful, intentional, and generous, including with yourself occasionally.
I think that's a very reasonable position, though I'll admit it's one I personally find quite difficult to inhabit.
Join the club. I think most of us swing between the extremes depending on our mood.
Very true. Right. Today's phrase before we wrap up.
Today's phrase is, to make ends meet. To make ends meet. It means to have just enough money to cover your basic expenses, to get by financially. You might say, with the cost of living so high at the moment, a lot of families are struggling to make ends meet. Or, when I first moved to London, I was working 2 jobs just to make ends meet.
To make ends meet. A very useful phrase, and one that's unfortunately very relevant for a lot of people right now.
It really is. Right, to bring everything together. Money is complicated. Our feelings about it are shaped by our childhoods, our culture, our deep psychological patterns. It is neither simply good nor simply bad. It's a tool, and like any tool, what matters is our relationship with it and how we choose to use it.
And perhaps the most useful thing any of us can do is simply become more conscious of that relationship. To notice the anxiety, the impulses, the scripts we're running, and ask whether they're actually serving us.
Beautifully put. Okay, before we go, just a few quick reminders.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please do like the video. It takes a single second and it helps enormously.
Subscribe to Pause Café if you haven't already. We have new episodes coming regularly, and we'd hate for you to miss one.
Leave us a comment today. We would genuinely love to know. What is your relationship with money like? Are you a saver or a spender? Do you find it easy to talk about money, or does it feel uncomfortable?
And please share this episode with a friend who is learning English. Or honestly, share it with anyone who's ever felt anxious about money, which, based on today's conversation, is more or less everyone.
More or less everyone. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. It means a great deal.
Take care of yourselves, spend wisely, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye for now.
Goodbye!